We all know billionaires hate socialism, and that's understandable, of course, because socialists want to tax them and take away a part of their immense wealth. So it would be fair to say that billionaires are enemies of socialism. But do you know what they are bigger enemies of? They are the biggest enemies of capitalism. Sounds ridiculous. Just hear me out and it'll make some sense. But before that, I'm going to pause for just a second so that you can click on that subscribe button. Please go ahead. Done it? Okay. Here is what I'm making this bizarre claim for, that the billionaires of the world who have gained the most from capitalism are also its biggest enemies. They will pretty soon bring about its downfall. But to understand this, we need to do a quick dive into how capitalism actually functions. In the simplest model, capitalists own factories and offices where workers come and work for them and get paid salaries and wages. Now, what happens to those salaries and wages? A major part of it goes right back to the capitalists because the workers spend their wages on buying goods and services from companies that these very capitalists own. Let me explain this with a very simplified set of numbers. Let us say capitalists together spent $500 on buying machines and raw materials and paid another $500 to their workers in terms of wages and salaries. That's a total cost of production of $1,000. Let us now also assume that they sold these goods and services at a 20% profit. You would say that they made 20% of 1,000, which is $200. But here's the catch. The workers would have spent around $480 out of the $500 they earned to buy goods and services from these same capitalists. So the capitalists got back those $480. One can break down this further. The $500 spent on machines and raw materials in the same manner also would have partly been spent as wages to the workers who produced them in the previous cycle, which in turn would then also have been used on buying goods and services from capitalists. In other words, whatever the capitalist class spends, it gets back most of it by selling goods and services to workers and each other. The British economist Joan Robinson summarized this by saying, capitalists earn what they spend and workers spend what they earn. Now, Joan Robinson was actually paraphrasing the famous Polish economist Michael Kalecki, who had argued that capitalists as a class gain exactly as much as they invest or consume, and if in a closed system they cease to construct or consume, they could not make any money at all. But note, I'm going to take this a little further. Note the crucial symbiosis here. Capitalists consume what they produce, not just consumer goods and services, but capital goods, machines, raw materials, equipment, and so on. All the things that are needed to produce more goods and services, which we call capital goods. But ultimately, they have to produce for the final consumer who's not a capitalist, which is not just the capitalist class, but workers too. So capitalism only survives if the working class earns enough to buy a part of the goods and services that the capitalists sell. Henry Ford realized this long ago, and that's why he doubled the wages of his workers. His logic was that if workers didn't get paid enough, then who would buy the Model T that his factories were churning out year after year? Historically, the capitalist class has always known this. They can only make profits if there is a class of people who earn enough to buy the things they sell. The post-war welfare policies in Europe and the USA that lasted from the mid-1940s to about the mid-1970s were primarily based on this idea that the common people needed to be taken care of through guaranteed jobs, decent wages, and subsidized education, health, and housing so that they would have enough money left to spend in the stores and the capitalists would sell those goods. But the game changer for capitalism wasn't just that the working class was comfortable. It was the rise of the middle class who helped capitalists maximize profits, were paid a good part of that in terms of salaries and bonuses, and then went out and spent a large part of their income on consumer products. For much of the last 8 decades, it is the middle class which has been the engine of capitalist growth. In the USA, the home of developed capitalism and the free market, the middle 40% of income earners, sandwiched between the top 10% and the bottom 50%, consistently earned about 45 to 46% of the national income between the 1950s and early 2000s. Now the share has dropped below 40%. On the other hand, the income share of the top 10%, which had dropped to around 33% in 1980, has now climbed to nearly 50%. No wonder the top 10% of US households drove 49.2% of all consumer spending in the second quarter of 2025. This is their highest share of total consumption since 1989. And no, I'm not talking about the bottom half of Americans here. Their share has been steadily declining for the past 55 years. So that is nothing new. What is new is the accelerated collapse of the middle class across the world. And at the same time, the massive concentration of income and wealth in the hands of a few thousand ultra-rich people. For instance, you are considered to be reasonably well-to-do if you make it to the top 10% of income earners in the USA. In terms of wealth, you need about $1 million of personal assets to make it to the top 10%, right? Now compare that to how wealthy the richest 10 Americans are today. Just 10. Between them, they average about $270 billion in net worth. That means an American standing at the 90th percentile in terms of wealth, which would make them some of the richest people not only in the USA but in the world, owns assets worth 0.004% of the average of the richest 10 people in the USA, the richest 10. Don't call me a bleeding heart here. I might be one, but I'm not talking about the gap between the ultra-rich and the poor. I am pointing to this ridiculous difference in wealth between the rich and the ultra-rich. No wonder so many Americans today use buy now, pay later cards to buy everyday groceries. And that the personal savings rate in the US has fallen to just 2.6% in April 2026, the lowest it has been in 65 years. It used to be about 8% just a few years ago. And no wonder DoorDash partnered with Klarna to let people borrow to finance their cheeseburger orders. By the way, the USA is still better off. Europe is much worse. Middle class consumption has shrunk drastically in the UK, Germany and other European economies thanks to the collapse of the middle class and their white collar jobs. If you want to know more about that, I have a recent video out on how the middle class is going extinct. I will put the link in the description below. Do watch it. The collapse of consumption across the world over the past decade or so has meant that consumer-facing businesses no longer make as much money as they used to. So money is flowing away from companies that make soaps, shampoos, processed food and provide mass consumer services. It's all moving to tech and AI companies. Other than the AI-driven tech companies and some energy producers, investment into other industries has either stagnated or completely shrunk. Companies are using their cash to give dividends or buy back shares to reward their rich shareholders instead of investing their money to grow their businesses. And what is that doing? All the money in the world is flowing into AI and tech, which is making the billionaires who own these businesses richer and richer. Today, the top 10 billionaires, as I said, in the USA have a combined wealth of $2.7 trillion. As I said, that's an average wealth of about $270 billion each. A super rich American, who would be counted among the top 0.1% of the richest Americans, would have to save all their income for the next 100,000 years to hit that average. That's the massive gap between the super rich and the ultra rich who control all the businesses that are making money today. Again, I repeat, I'm not talking about the poor. I'm talking about the fact that even the once well-to-do middle class in the richest countries in the world are losing the ability to buy goods and services very, very fast. And even the super rich cannot access funds to build new businesses because everything has been cornered by the billionaires. This is a disaster for the future of capitalism, by the way. If there is no one left to consume, capitalists will have nothing to invest in. Yes, they will sustain things by investing in building capital and technology that is meant to increase productivity in some future date. That is exactly where all the world's money is flowing right now, as I said. But sooner than later, those businesses have to feed consumer-facing industries that will sell goods and services to the final consumer, the workers, the middle class. AI and robotics are already threatening to remove that consumer completely. Not just the working class, by the way, but much more importantly, from the point of view of consumption, AI is destroying the middle class too. The billionaires and the governments they have propped up are to blame for this. That is why I said they are the biggest enemies of capitalism. Do you agree with what I've said in this video? Let me know in the comments. Let me know if you disagree with what I've said as well, because questions help me think and sharpen my views, or even change them if you can convince me. And as always, like, comment and share. And don't forget to subscribe, because that will help you know when a new video drops.